Shalom. Today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf Kufyu Beis, Bava Basra 112, and this daf is dedicated for Shemir for the Chayalim, itself for the Shvuyim, and Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eis Tzara. And we're going to start on Kufyu Aleph from a base at the second Y line. Gemara is discussing what's the source for the idea that a husband inherits his wife, but the wife does not inherit the husband. So the Gemara explains that there was the first approach was that it was based upon the fact that the pasuk says v'yarash osa, but now the Gemara, which was cites a brisa that records different opinions about it. So the Gemara says v'haitana ma'isele mehacha on the second white line. The Gemara says there's a brisa which has a different approach. The Tanya, the first approach of the brisa is v'yarash osa. Muhammad Shabal Yoresh Ishto. Rebbe Kiva. Rebbe Kiva says he shall inherit her. This teaches us a husband inherits his wife. Whereas Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Eino Tzarach. Rabbi Shmuel says, no, we don't rely upon that verse. Why say the lashon of Eino Tzarach? Perhaps because as the Gemara showed that has to apply like some hermeneutic gymnastics in order to interpret it. So therefore, the Gemara cites the position of Rabbi Shmuel. It says, Hare Omer b'kol bas yoreshes nachoa mimatos b'nei Yisrael. It says in the pasuk that there's a prohibition of utisov nachala of Bnei Yisrael. That you're not allowed to. This was a prohibition just for the generation of the Midbar. That the inheritance is not allowed to pass from one tribe to a different tribe. That everyone has to stick to their tribe. And so we see from here. Well, I read the wrong verse, but it says, but that's relevant to our discussion. It says, "V'chol bas yoreshes nachala." That was the first pasuk. The first pasuk is "Lotisov nachala uvnei Yisrael mimatel matek ish benachos matel v'savit b'nei Yisrael." And the next pasuk says, "V'chol bas yoreshes nachala." And any girl who is going to inherit, how is she inheriting? If she has no brothers, mimatos b'nei Yisrael, from the tribes of Bnei Israel. She has to marry somebody from her father's tribe. So that somebody from her family, so each person, the land will stay in the tribe. Anyway, we see the pasuk says So it says that any girl who's inheriting from the tribes, she has to marry somebody from the tribe. So what is that referring to? This was obviously referring to the case. The Gemara says, the pasuk is talking to us, and she's not going to marry a husband from a different tribe because then the tribe will transfer, the territory will transfer to her husband through her husband inheriting her. And also it states, there's another pasuk which has the same idea, that the inheritance cannot transfer from one tribe to another, but through marriage. And then there's another pasuk. The next pasuk states, and so that you don't transfer the inheritance from one tribe to another. So that you have to marry within your tribe. So we have these three psukim. And then the Gemara now cites two other psukim. Elazar ben Aaron and Elazar the son of Aaron died. They buried him in the hills of Pinchas his son. How did Pinchas have property that Elazar didn't have? It must be that Pinchas married a woman and she died. The Yarsha, and he inherited her. And so that's how we know that Pinchas must have inherited from his wife. Omar Uskuv Holidas Yair, and there's another pasuk that Skuv gave birth to Yair. Vahilo Esrim Vishalosh Arim Be'eretz Gilad, and he had 23 cities in the land of Gilad. V'chiminayin Shalo Hayalo Skuv. V'chiminayin Yair on top of Kufyu Beis of Alf. Where did Yair have property? Shalo Hayalo Skuv that Skuv didn't have. Muhammad Shanasa Yair Isha. That must be that Yair married a woman and she died. V'yarsha, and he inherited her. So the Gemara asked the question, Maiva Omer. Well, why do we need all these 5 psukim? So the Gemara says, well, there's 2 possibilities to be talking about the way that the property can transfer. It could transfer through her husband, or it could be transferring through her son. a son inherits her mother's property that she brought in. That we're talking about a woman who comes from that she's inheriting from her mother and her father, and they're from two different tribes. So therefore, maybe it's not talking about the Hasabas Habal. Maybe it's not being talking about the transfer through the husband. Maybe it's talking about the transfer through the son. Maybe that's all the pasuk is talking about. The son inheriting, but maybe the husband doesn't inherit. That's why the next pasuk says that it cannot transfer from one tribe to another. And so therefore one pasuk is talking about Hasabas Aben, and the other one could be talking about Hasabas Abal. And maybe they're both talking about the transfer through the son. And it's to tell us if she does this, that there will be a positive, she'll be in violation of both a negative commandment and a positive commandment. Excuse me. And so sometimes that's what we do. We say that the Torah just wants to increase the levels of penalties, and so therefore it'll add additional prohibition on top of it. If that's what you want to say, Tashma, then we have the third pasuk that you know how to transfer the inheritance from one tribe to another, which would be talking about the Asaba Sabal through the husband. And maybe you want to say the Torah just wants to increase so many prohibitions, and so therefore it's going to say that there's two prohibitions and a positive commandment here. The Gemara says, hold on. One second. One second. Okay, so and if you want to say v'chitema, if you want to say that maybe it's to tell us that there's two prohibitions and a positive commandment, and that's what, and there's nothing to do with Asaba Sabal. It's not a proof that the husband inherits. It's still talking about Asaba Saben. Tashma, therefore, we have the next pasuk. Elazar ben Aromes, and Pinchas had this, and he was buried in the property of Pinchas' son. Elazar, who did not this Umes V'yarsa Pinchas. Maybe it doesn't prove that the husband inherits, because maybe Elazar is the one who married a woman, and she died, and Pinchas inherited. Maybe it's not about the husband inheriting. Tashma, so therefore we have the fifth pasuk, who Skuv Holidas Yair. That Skuv gave birth to Yair. And that proves that it was through the husband. People say, well, here also in the case of Skudah and Yair, it's the son inheriting and not necessarily the husband. Why would we need two psukim to teach us this drasha? We already learned from the pasuk of Pinchas that the son inherited his mother. So for sure, it's teaching us that the husband in this last case. So the Gemara says, hold on one second. The Gemara says, I'm going to Papa Abaye, so Bava says Abaye, Domo Ome Mochabawo Yaris. Maybe the husband. So Tosfos asked the question that I was wondering about. That's what I was just wondering. And Tosfos says, what do you mean? The Gemara says, we know that by Skuv and Yair, it's obviously talking about the son, about the husband, because we wouldn't need two psukim about the son. And Pinchas was about the son. We don't need another one about the son. So the Gemara said, Tosfos asked the question, well, Afagav the Krak Kama Nami Shalotzach. No, but the pasuk about Pinchas we also don't need. Shamina Mitoras Moshe because we learned from the first three psukim that the son inherits. We wouldn't care so much if Yeshua was also teaching us that. We wouldn't say anything. But two times in the Nach as opposed to just the Torah, we wouldn't say it. And this is Rashba, which is not the Rashba that we know, but one of the Balei Tosfos. So the Gemara now says, okay, so back to the Gemara. The Gemara says, maybe the husband doesn't inherit it. And maybe the pasuk about Pinchas teaching us that the son inherits. The Yair and the pasuk about Yair is to Zab and Mizpah. And how do you know that Yair inherited it? Maybe he bought it. Pinchas Nami did Zab and Mizpah. And Pinchas also, how do we know that it was proof that the son inherits? Maybe he also bought it. Amalei, no. Pinchas did Zab and Mizpah and Lamatis. We would not say that Pinchas bought it. Why? We wouldn't say that Pinchas bought it. Why? The imkain nimtas sidei choseres biyovel. Because if that would be the case, the field would go back in the Jubilee year. And imtat tzaddik kavor bekever sheina shalom. So then Pinchas would have buried his father in a grave that didn't belong to him. And this is not appropriate for the tzaddik to be buried in a grave that's not a family grave yard. And so therefore we wouldn't say that it's bought. It has to be a nacha that doesn't go back. It's an inheritance that doesn't go back. And so therefore we must say that he got that land as an inheritance. And so therefore this proves, like we said, that we're trying to prove that a husband inherits his wife, even though we're saying that Pinchas was inheriting from his mother. So the Mishal Melch asks, how could the Gemara say that he acquired this land and then purchased and then dug a burial spot for his father? It says in Yerushalmi that if somebody purchases a field from his friend during the time of Jubilee, that you're not allowed to dig a hole in it and ruin the field. It says v'shavach so. That means you can't just return it. And so therefore the Mishnah Melch answers that maybe he had permission to dig the grave, but he didn't have permission to keep it. And so therefore he's going to have to return in the Jubilee year, and he wouldn't bury his father in a place where it wasn't going to be his for generations. Ela ema denafo emistecharam. So it's possible that Pinchas got this field. Pinchas got this field as it was called a stei haramim. It's not something he inherited and not something he purchased, but it's something that is his forever. How so? It's what's called, somebody consecrates his field. He says, this field is a cherem upon me. And then the halacha is, this becomes a field that the Kohen gets it, and it does not return in the Jubilee year to the person, because it says Kol cherem b'Yisrael chayiyeh, and that's what the pasuk says. And then it goes to the Kohen. So you can't prove from the pasuk of Pinchas that a husband inherits his wife. And maybe he got it from a stei haramim. And so therefore, the pasuk about Yair could be a reference to the son inheriting and not a proof that the husband inherits his wife. So therefore, there's a question on Rabbi Shmuel's approach. But anyway, going back to the idea that Rabbi Shmuel had introduced, that the whole source was, it says in the pasuk. Now it said, that the girl who inherits from the two tribes, from the tribe of her father and the tribe of her mother, she has to marry only into her father's tribe so that the inheritance doesn't transfer somewhere else. But the Gemara asked the obvious question about this. The Gemara says, well, and if she's inheriting from her mother's tribe, in the end, anyway, she's taking the inheritance from her mother's tribe to her father's tribe. And so there, anyway, she's already transferring it out. Where says, how do you know that's the case? Maybe it's allowed, maybe it's not considered transferring it out, because in that case, it's already been transferred when her mother married her father. Where it says, no. Shekfar huspa lo amrinan. We're not going to say that. And if you want to say, or the Rashbam has a different girsa, and he found this girsa in the tshuva of Rabbeinu Gershom Meor Ineagoa. He was the Gadol Ador in the generation before Rashi, and he says, and his gear says like this: Rabbi, we shifted the email, shifted to Abba, and the Gemara says maybe it's different. And Gemara answers, maybe you want to say, oh, if it already transferred, then we're not going to say Vidilma Shekvar Huspa. And maybe you want to say that Lo Amrina. We don't say this logic. We say even if it already passed from the mother to the daughter, nevertheless, it's not completely transferred out, because the daughter herself is living half from this tribe of the mother, and so therefore we want to say that she can't do it again and marry somebody else. But we're not going to say that because it only makes sense to say that once it's already happened, we're not worried. Because it says Rav Yemer to Rav Ashi, if you want to say Shekfar Huspa, if you want to say that, if you want to say that once she's already married out, once the mother married out, then there's no prohibition to transfer. That's why we could say the pasuk can apply to both the transfer of the son and the transfer of the husband. If you want to say we don't say kfar huspa, but rather we're still going to be concerned for the transferring of the inheritance of the mother. What does it matter if she marries somebody else from her father's tribe? Meaning to say, what does it matter if she marries somebody from her father's tribe? She's still uprooting the inheritance from her mother's tribe to her father's tribe. And so therefore, if we're going to say that we don't say kfar husba, that once it's transferred, there's no prohibition. So there is a prohibition. So if that's the case, how can she marry somebody from her father's tribe? She's transferring it from her mother's. So the Gemara says that Rav Ashi responds to Abaye's question, say the mitzambinale gavra mitzambinale gavra davui mishifta de avuav ima mishifta dima. So the first approach is she's going to marry somebody that her also whose father was her father's tribe and his mother was from her mother's tribe. And in that case, their father's inheritance would not be uprooted because her husband is following her father, and her mother's inheritance is not uprooted because it's going to remain in the possession of a person, either her husband or son, who also comes from that shevet. So the Gemara says, "Whoa, no way, if that's the case, then it shouldn't have said in the pasuk that she should marry it shouldn't say she's married to somebody from her father's tribe. It should say somebody from her father's tribe and her mother's tribe. The Gemara says, no, if that would be the case, that would be the case, it said she could even, I might have thought she could marry either somebody from her mother or her, whose father was from her mother, somebody whose father was from her mother's tribe and his mother was her father's tribe, which wouldn't be allowed. And so therefore, it's possible that this is the reading. So Gemara says no. So therefore, in the end, the Torah says to teach us, it would be possible to teach us that the whole idea is that the lineage of her husband needs to come from his father, so it doesn't get uprooted. And so therefore, we still have the question that maybe the Torah is saying that the mother of the husband could be from the same tribe as her mother, so that it doesn't get uprooted. So the Gemara now says, since we learned we have all these 5 verses that are talking about, 3 of them are talking about that prohibition of Otisov, which is just a prohibition for the generation of the wilderness. And some you could read it as a prohibition of being transferred through the husband, and some is prohibition being transferred through the son. So the Gemara now brings a brisa that discusses this. Tanya, what are these psukim referring to? So one brisa says, so one brisa says that this prohibition is through the transfer through the son, and one is that the transfer is through the husband. So the Gemara says, it says in the first pasuk, the first brisa says, the first pasuk says you can't transfer from one tribe to another. The Torah is warning us a woman can't marry another man from a different tribe, so that the inheritance will be passed down when her son inherits her. Is it through the son or maybe through the husband? No, when the pasuk says that the next world, two psukim later, it says it can't transfer from one tribe to another. That's the Stiva Sabal. Amani Mikhaim Lotisav Nachum Neisam Matel Mateh. So what does it mean when it says it doesn't transfer one tribe to another? That's the Stiva Sabana Kosmodam. That's talking about the transfer through the sun. And Tanya Idach, another price says Lotitsav on top of Kufyu Gimel but Alf. Another price says Lotitsav Nachum Matel Mateh, and that's talking about B'Stiva Sabal. That's talking about through the husband. So the Gemara says, "B'Siba Sabal kosim medaber atal mer b'Siba Sabal olinu al b'Siba Sabal." Maybe that pasuk talking about the transfer through the son. Kishol mer v'otitzov nachol of Bnei Yisrael mimatel matab. And then when we have the first pasuk, it says you can't transfer from one tribe to another. Haraya Saba Sabana more. So that's talking about transfer through the son. Armani mekayim v'otitzov nachol mimatel matacher b'Siba Sabal kosim medaber. So the first person that we cite in this price was talking about the husband. So the Gemara says the Kuli Amam mimatel matel cher b'asava sabal kosam medaber. Everybody's in a position, meaning both prices are in the position when it says from one tribe to another tribe. That's talking about the transfer through the husband. My mashma, how is this implied? So the Gemara says, how is this implied? My mashma. So the Gemara says, Siman Amarav Bar Shila Amakra Ish, that the pasuk gives us, or Siman is the name of the Amora. That's what the Rav Yaakov Emden says. Or some say, the Rav Yaakov Emden says you should make the Girsa Imam Siman, meaning give them a sign. Or anyway, so Amarav Bar Shila Amakra Ish, it says you should not transfer from one tribe to another. Ki ish yidbeku. Each man shall cleave to the tribes of the children of Israel. And ish implies the husband. And so therefore, that's what it's referring to, the hasaba sabal, the transfer through the husband. And where it says travayo ish ksiv behu. In both of these psukim that we're citing, it says the word ish. In one pasuk, it says ki ish benachos matav asav yidbeku. And in the first pasuk it says ki ish b'nachaso yidbeku matos b'nei Yisrael. So both say ish. Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak Amakra yidbeku. It says in the pasuk that v'lo tisov nachal mimatal matecha ki ish b'nachaso yidbeku. And the word dibuk implies the davak b'ishto, marriage. And Gemara says travayu yidbeku ksibu, but both of them say yidbeku. So both psukim say yidbeku. El amarava amakra. The pasuk there says ish b'nachaso yidbeku matos, and that implies through the husband, because through the marriage he is attaching his tribe to the tribe of his wife, and not through the son. Ravashi amakra mimatel matal acher, from one tribe to another tribe, and the husband is an acher, whereas a ben lav acher, whereas the son is not considered an other. And he's considered like a part of her. Okay, we'll stop here. This is today's beautiful daf yomi. God willing, pick this up.